Happy Thanksgiving. Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Eddie Phillips. This is the Erudition Network Black History and Knowledge session. We are doing this session on Thanksgiving, and I hope you're having a great time with your family and friends and enjoying this Thanksgiving Day. Um, I don't expect that we will get to a lot of people, but I wanted to make sure that we did this episode today, as we try to do every Thursday, and not blow it off and just take it as the holiday because there is much to discuss. And there are many things that are going on in the world that have a historical significance as well as a current significance and ramification for us. Um, Many of you today are having a really good, hopefully, having a good time with family. You have uh, probably filled your bellies and gone along. We're still, my family, just like yours, is enjoying this Thanksgiving Day. Um, so I don't want to belabor, and we only have an hour. And as I said, I don't expect too many. To be on here because I know you're spending time with your family and that is significant. But I wanted to talk about some things today. Um, Last week when we did the session, we had a really good time um, and going into a lot of history that again a lot of us don't know or has been hidden from us, and is not such not a standard, not a standard. And so what we try to do here on Erudition is to provide that and to give you um, those backgrounds. And that's what I'm going to do today. As I said today, we know what today is, Thanksgiving. Um, and so we have to think about Thanksgiving and its significance. I was earlier today, I was looking at a chat that I had with someone over the last couple of days, back and forth. We had a chat about the significance of Thanksgiving for African American people. And the question was, is it significant for us, right? Is there something that we get um, that considering that we come from a um, slave background, ancestors who were enslaved by others, how does that play into our understanding of Thanksgiving? And so the conversation was really good, but in the end of the day, there were things that I don't think that people really get about Thanksgiving. As you know, we celebrate Thanksgiving, and I think for me, I'll just give my background as what I saw, what I was exposed to growing up. We all got the same standard story about Plymouth, the Pilgrims, and the indigenous people, and how there was so much imagery put forth with the Pilgrims celebrating um, a first Thanksgiving with indigenous people. And then over the course of uh, a century or so, we realized the Plymouth Lie, as they call it, right? The identified the fact that it wasn't like that. It wasn't a part of that. So that's one of the things that we were all taught, no matter who you were, coming up through school. Most of us were giving that myth, that lie, um, but it's so much deeper than that. One, when the Pilgrims came over to the Americas, um, there was no idea of what do they call it, friendliness with the Indians, with the indigenous people. In fact, when they first arrived, one of the first things that the Pilgrims did, and we need to cover that, is that they stole from the Indians. Now that is not a made up fact. The Pilgrims did that. They came, and when they arrived, they didn't. They were suffering, poor, didn't have too many things. And so when we look at what the Pilgrims did when they got here, they wrote it down. Um, they talked about um, what they did in detail. As a matter of fact, um, when when they got here, they had just before they arrived, and was it 1617, there had been a pandemic that had swept New England for decades. And so there was a lot of suffering even before the Pilgrims even got here. And Squanto talked about how the Pilgrims smell bad because they didn't, wash, and there was much sickness even before they landed. And so there was a lot of suffering, and they came and they dug up. Well, I shouldn't say dug up. The Indians bury their people towards the sky, and they had designated places where they had buried their people. And when the Pilgrims arrived in Plymouth, they found these graves, these things sitting out with tools. They found seeds. They found offerings of corn and different things. And it is documented in their writing that they stole those things from the indigenous people when they got here, when they arrived. Hey, Regina, I hope you're having a really, really good Thanksgiving. I'm good. Oh, thank you so much for answering my question. It was sort of version. Okay. Yeah, it was a short version, but there's very much to unpack or what went on in that time. And so it's very interesting. And what Regina is alluding to is what we talked about last week when we talked about Blacks and how the Black people of our ancestors. I'm going to get out of my Pilgrim spiel for a moment and kind of give you the context of what she was saying here. When did Blacks stop being Republicans? Under Lincoln. Now there is a tie-in here. There's a tie-in. So let me do a quick tie-in here, because when we talk about Thanksgiving, right? Let me move aside from the Pilgrims, but we know that the original Thanksgiving was formed because after the American Revolutionary War, and it occurred because of what the British had, some of the victories of the British. And so in response, the Continental Congress delivered a decree for all of the colonies to give thanks, right? And so that is what started it. And it's interesting to our history, right? But the way Lincoln plays into it is because in October of 1863, after signing the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln signed a proclamation to officially celebrate Thanksgiving, right? As a holiday. Now, he understood this because it was significant. I'm going to have to touch on this history too, because during that time, before the proclamation, Thanksgiving was the time, it was the end of harvest. We can see right now at the turn of the year, it was coming toward the end of the harvest. And this was the time when many slaves took advantage of deliveries and things like that, and they escaped. So slaves always kind of celebrated this time of year, right? Because it was at this time where many of them were able to flee from bondage. They thank God for it. They did a lot of prayer. But Lincoln plays into by making this official, because when he made this official, it also became something that slaves could have thanks for being free, right? It became no more the idea of being running away at the end of harvest season. It became about an actual holiday to give thanks to God for allowing you to be free. So when they were delivered from bondage, they remembered that, and Thanksgiving became significant. If you wanted to understand, and I'm going even deeper, but if you want to understand how slaves celebrated Thanksgiving, they always started it with a church service. It was always began with them going to church to celebrate freedom. The Black preachers and pastors gave sermons talking about being freed and equating African Americans to the children of Israel. And it would talk about the struggles. It would talk about what they went through. It would talk about fears. It would talk about the successes. It would talk about those who they felt freed them. That's what they call Lincoln Moses and different things of that type, right? But Lincoln plays a part into this, right? So that's the connection to Lincoln. But Lincoln was a Republican. So when as asked that question about last week, African Americans, upon freedom, many of them became Republicans. They were Republicans because they saw Republican as freedom. And so they stayed in that party, and they were a part of that party, right? And they felt that the Republicans were the liberators, and they allowed them to vote. Grant sent troops down to the South to protect their freedoms post-Civil War, right? And so there was a lot of connection with the Republican Party when the Democrats, as they saw it, they felt were oppressing them. And so going into that history of when we switched from that to Democrat is huge, right? Because it also shows us where we are today. I'm so glad you're talking about such, because I was just thinking about how wrong it is to celebrate this holiday, considering the truth of how it came about. I feel there need to be a change of this holiday. And do you think there is a way to possibly have this change to be for a day of reflection, of being thankful for things, bring unity, real freedom, social justice? I believe that initially that's what they wanted it to be. I believe that coming out of the Civil War, Lincoln, and them understood, and different individuals understood the need for thanking God for not completely destroying the country. We need to understand also that historically, if you were to go and look through the annals of history, you will notice that many people fought, right? Many nations had civil wars, and they did not come back together. Those countries segmented, they went their different ways. People, whole nations collapsed. So to have a nation to be able to survive a civil war during those days, and their knowledge of history was significant. And Lincoln knew that, and he understood that. And so the idea of giving thanks to God for allowing this to happen and for us to be saved from total destruction. As he said, a nation divided cannot stand. And so trying to bring unity together in Thanksgiving was a part of it. But I believe that somewhere down the line, we lost those understandings, and there should be a time to reflect. But if we can't teach ourselves history, if we can't share history with each other and truth, then the problem will stay, because we're sitting here telling ourselves that these things are not important. CRT, critical race theory, being the buzzword. But when we talk about Black history as it is, no matter how we look at it, the question that you sent me, the different things that we're going through, we just watched recently over this last week, and I haven't spoken on this. We watched recently with the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. We saw everything that went on with that, and I saw different opinions on it, and I saw folks say, well, it's not so significant to us. These things don't really affect us. But we need to understand something here. And this is my take on it from a historical perspective. Some of this blame, and this is not going to sit well with a lot of people when they watch the recast of this, if they watch it. Some of this blame rests with us. Not just African Americans, America as a culture. It rests heavily with us, with what happened with those lives that were taken, and this young man going out and taking these lives and injuring folks. And why do I say that? When you minimize the idea of what your citizenship, what your value to this country is, and too often African Americans do this. They do this. I wrote earlier today, the illusion and the lie that we tell ourselves during this day, particularly about Thanksgiving and unity. I do believe in projection, that you want to claim something and say, Lord, this is what I want. But I also believe that you need to speak truth to what's going on. And African Americans for far too long, and I'm going to speak specifically of the African American culture, we make excuses and we do not follow that line of thinking. So how are we held to blame for this too? I remember when, just even before Donald Trump was elected president, for the better part of 40 40 years, we have begged and pleaded with our people to vote, to withstand oppression, and to go out and vote both local and federal. We have told them that if you do not play a part in the legal system, then the legal system will decide things for you that are outside of your control. Politicians, civil rights experts, people have said this for decades, and we refuse. When Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were running for office, many people said, many celebrities also said it, stood up and said, I'm sorry for that alarm, stood up and said that I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to vote. It has nothing to do with me. This is white people's politics. But it's American politics. So when you don't vote for a judge, what happens is you get a judge who does not care about your perspective, your well-being, because you didn't put him there. You didn't elect him. You didn't get him where he is. He owes no fealty, nothing to you. And so when he gets out here and he protects or he does things along the law that allows white young men or white privileged people to walk out of court as they abuse, kill blacks, people of color, and the poor, because they kill whites too, then what's going to happen, and it's happened historically, is you're going to have laws written against you and a system that is designed to not give you equality. And so you're not going to have equality. So when Kyle Rittenhouse shot those men and he went to court, and it seemed, as I saw many people complain, it seems like this judge is on his side. And the judge will say, I'm following the law. But the law is written for, what laws are you following? Laws that are written to allow you to throw things out, things that the people in that community, people in that environment pay no attention to until it was too late. And so murderers walk out. Killers are able to get away with what they do. And because of the way that the American legal system works, we say to ourselves, the law has spoken. Even if we know that the railroading of it was wrong. We watched the Ahmaud Arbery case, and we see people celebrating, and that's wonderful, and that's great, and I'm celebrating too, that people are convicted of crimes that they deserve to be convicted of. But what I also saw was people championing this case, just as they did when Barack Obama was elected president, as a change in the system, as a validation that there is no oppression, no foulness, no inequality in our systems. And that is not the case. That is not the case. In truth, we are regressing. We're regressing. And we're regressing because of the things that we keep laying down, the things we keep giving up. And the only way for us to move forward is to be honest, as Regina said a little while ago. A thing of unity, honesty. You can't move forward without honesty. You can't change things if you're lying about it every day. And too many people lie about the things that they see every day going on in this country. I was sitting here, getting back to what my point of earlier, thinking about how Thanksgiving should play out for African Americans. African Americans should be some of the most thankful people in the world. And to a certain extent, we are. To a certain extent, we are. But we should not be so allegiant to the idea of foul treatment. Thank God for the things that he has done, but also be honest for the things that man has done and tell that truth. Tell that truth. Don't hide from it. You know, I had the opportunity to not do Erudition today, as I have every week. And one of the reasons that I am actually on tonight, regardless of who is on, is because I see where we're going, what is happening with us, and I see the regression. I saw African Americans talking about these cases, and on both sides of the political aisle, the religious mentality, whatever it is. But one of the resounding things that disturbed me, and it's everybody's opinion in your argument, is the idea of this has nothing to do with me. That's just, it's not true. Last week, I told you, I presented a narrative of how far, how much we have done in America, how far African Americans have had to strive in fighting against presidents and authority. That can never happen if people feel that it's not their fight. Let's remember that Ahmaud Arbery was a black man running through a neighborhood, simply jogging. Could be anybody. Let's remember that Kyle Rittenhouse is a young white man who went to an area that is not his own to go police in what he considered to be a riotous situation for a Black Lives Matter rally. And let's understand the motivation behind that. There are so many historical connections to that. The idea of a young boy walking around with a weapon and feeling like he has to protect the area from what? Now, were there white people who were shot and killed? Yes, and we'll get to that. But the other thing about that is, what rally did he go to? What was his rally? He came there with the assumption, right, that these are rioters, because the media and everything else had told everyone, right, black, white, and whatever, that people were showing up and rioting, destroying property. That gave a justification to some in their mind to come out as a militia with loaded weapons and opposing views to corral folks. One of the things that bothers me with this trial, and I said people are going to be mad, is how we do things. I could go online, but I'm not going to do that. You're going to do that. And I want you to go pull up pictures from the 1950s, the 1960s, and even the early 70s, when protests were happening for civil rights. When blacks stood up and said no more to people like Bull Connor, right? And I want you to see how they went about that. They went out. Hey, sis, happy Thanksgiving to you too. They went out in their finest. They didn't have a lot. But you go watch those pictures, you look at those pictures and those videos, you see people in a suit jacket wearing coveralls and different things, looking country. But that they came out looking a certain way because they wanted to give no excuse, no validity to the idea that they were anything more than innocent people protesting against something that was foul, and that they were on the just side of history. But if you look at those pictures then, and I didn't think I was going to get into the subject today, but I guess I am, and you go look at the pictures today, and what do you see? You see young people and old, Some of us out there too. Some folks out here wearing gang paraphernalia. Some folks out here screaming about things they don't even understand. People making threats. People running up to the police aggressively. Mind you, do you not think that the people in the 50s, 60s, and the 70s, people whose grandparents, uncles, sisters, brothers were murdered, lynched? We talked about that history. Go back and watch some of these old episodes of Erudition. Slaughtered with no legal recourse, just gone, vanished. Some bodies not even retrieved. But they stood out there in their finest, uniformed. They went to church. That's a key. We talked earlier about Thanksgiving and how Thanksgiving was a time that every African American after 1863, they all went to church. The church was the foundation. The church was the place of meeting. The church was a place of creation. The church helped you build your house. The church network helped you get your job. The church kept you fed when you didn't have anything. And yet these people met in this church, and the church, Dr. King, Fred Shuttlesworth, different people sat here and said, this is what we're going to do. We know that there are murderous white people in the South who all have guns. We're not going to show up with guns. We're going to march uniformly. We're going to go to a certain place. We're going to make demands. That was the approach. They put it in God's hands, as Dr. King said. You put that fight in God's hands. Today, what we see a lot, and this is why I'm even talking about Rittenhouse, what we see a lot is no movement. There's no movement here. You can call Black Lives Matter a movement. You can call whatever you want to call a movement. There's no movement here. The LGBTQ, they have a movement. Let me tell you how. They go to businesses, they go to places, and they make a demand. You will hire people who are transgender, lesbian, gay, or whatever. They make a demand. They say, you will not discriminate against us in businesses. And they make a huge outcry when it happens. We get out together and we do protest, but it often goes into violence. Not because we initiate it, but because we allow everybody to come into these protests. And you say, well, why, Eddie, why are you saying this? Why are you saying this? I'm going to tell you why I'm saying it historically. If you go back and you look at the labor strikes, if you go back in history and look at strikes in the Ford Company, if you go back and look at anything during the progressive movement of the 20s, right, you will note that every time, the 1910s and the 1920s, right, you will note that anytime these protesters, predominantly white, went out to fight for the 7-hour workday, child labor rights, and female suffrage rights, almost every time, and I will put the references in the sources for you, there was violence. People fired upon. The Haymarket riots is an example. People shot at, people killed. And what makes the civil rights movement and why it's so important to reflect on that when we look at this Rittenhouse situation is because when you bring nonsense to the fight, people will not take you seriously, or they will victimize you. They will say, well, look at them. Look at how they look. Look at what they do. Dr. Kingdom understood this. I used the Montgomery bus boycott as a primary example. They understood this. They went specifically and told people who were from a thuggish frame of life, don't show up at the rally. Do give them the excuse. We watched anarchists during that time burning down buildings and writing Black Lives Matter on walls of Black businesses. We watched and saw that there were whites dressed in black and they were doing this. This is all documented. I don't have to make this up for you. And unfortunately, as I have told several friends of mine who are white and who are liberal and call it and claim to be really, and I say the word activists, but I often tell them, as it should be said to them, that you can go out to a rally, but the moment you throw that rock, they don't put a white face on that throwing. They put a black face on it. So for my friends and brothers out there who said that the Rittenhouse situation, I did not think I was going to get into all this Rittenhouse stuff tonight, does not apply to you. My sisters who said, hey, y'all, let's forget this. This ain't got nothing to do with us. Though there were white bodies that hit that ground and people who died who were white, the only reason why that happened was because white activists who stood up with black people died at a black rally protesting rights and ideas that should be in support of positive black life. Kyle Rittenhouse would not have been there had he not shown up for a Black Lives Matter rally to police it, to oversee it. And there is always the racial connotation here because he was celebrated by the police that were there. Thank you for helping us. Thank you all for showing up. It states it in areas where we have seen cases where black men and women have been thrown on the ground, beaten to a pulp, some killed, for just simply owning a weapon. Philando Castile got shot in his car in front of his girlfriend and her daughter, simply because he said, I have the right to own this gun. And when you say these things don't apply to us, that they don't have a function in our life, I think you're deluding yourself. I think you're deluding yourself. And so I don't know if this idea is I don't think we understand it as much as we say we do. And I understand why we say this isn't important. I understand why we claim that this doesn't have anything to do with us. Because we want to tell ourselves that this is just white life, white people. But do you have to look at the history, which is why we're here, which is why we're on here, and why we're here every Thursday. You have to pull up that history and go look at those riots. Black people, African Americans who watch this show, I want you to understand that there is no weakness in you making a demand and protesting. There is no weakness in you protesting, period. But there does become a weakness when we don't take the examples, the successful examples that have been provided to us historically. Some of the civil rights struggles, whether it be in Selma, Birmingham, every place that those struggles went down, the successes came from the idea of keeping yourself committed to nonviolence and how you present what you do. The moment that you find yourself going into this idea of fighting, meeting force with force, you give the excuse. And all they need a lot of times is that excuse that will allow them to go further, to allow people to die. And that has happened. That has happened. Didn't think I was going to get into all of that tonight. As I said, what I really wanted to talk about tonight was our take on Thanksgiving, our idea of why do we celebrate it. And since there's not a lot of people who are on tonight, and I expected that, as I said earlier, I want you to think about that and question that. What would you say? Why should African Americans give thanks in today's climate or culture? Why should they? Why should we participate in some of these holidays of brotherhood and union, knowing what we've been through in our history? Now, I can only tell you what I think. I believe that we should be doing that because without the unity that has been displayed, despite everything that we have gone through and everything that we have seen for decades, the unity and the brotherhood of African Americans has, and people of color, as long as also with many non-bigoted, biased whites, has saved America, has kept America. So I think that we should celebrate it. One of the other things I wanted to discuss tonight, as we were getting ready to do this, and I was thinking about everything that's gone on this week. It's been so much going on, just period, in our society and what we're dealing with here. And when I say this regression, but one of the other things I wanted to talk about is our lack of propaganda, right? Our lack of understanding propaganda. Too often, African Americans fall victim to media propaganda. And I've watched recently how we get basically corralled into these thoughts, processes, groups. I call it actually the what they call it, what do we call it? We call it the culture of cults, the cultish culture that we're dealing with. We have a different sects of America that seem to be all coming from the same impetus, right? Impetus. They all come from the same place, but at the same time, what they're doing, right, seems different. And we don't seem as a culture sometimes to be able to identify that. And so we fall into traps. I heard Reverend Barber say the okey doke, right? We fall into this okey doke. And then we convince ourselves, many of us, that I'm not lost. I'm not falling into the okey doke, right? I had posted recently, I said, are you afraid to post anything about racial intolerance on your social media account? Are you afraid to speak on things like the Ahmaud Arbery case? Are you afraid to talk about what is going on with Black people in this country? Because on your social media, whether it be your Facebook or whatever you're using, you're afraid that people are going to see you differently, that they're going to say, oh man, you pushing race. Everything's not about race. Maybe you don't feel that you're properly equipped to be able to argue with them or to debate with them about an issue. So in turn, you just ignore it. You don't put these things out. You don't talk about them. And so in doing that, you just ignore it. And I had a conversation recently with a friend of mine about this very issue. And I said, the idea of that, you don't understand what that does, the propaganda, what that does. In Nazi Germany, and I know that seems extreme, but we have to talk about it. Joseph Goebbels knew how to use propaganda. He believed that if you tell a lie long enough and consistently enough, the public has no choice but to believe it, or at least to accept it. And this mentality was pushed on us for this last president's. Rather you look at it, however you sit on the political aisle, you cannot deny that there was a level of lying that actually went beyond what we have seen in my lifetime of 40-something years. And so the lies were thrown out here enough that people believe, they at least accepted it as a norm. And unfortunately, when those things happen, and it's happening too much in our culture, people fall down, they just fall into a trap. They believe that what is being said is okay. Like I said, you don't have to believe it, you just have to accept it. And unfortunately, it feeds into our children, it feeds into our people, it feeds into our daily lives. Unfortunately, we can't get it out of our mentality. So when we merge these American ethnocentric mentalities, these racist, Kabbalic, Anglo-Saxon, evangelical, religious, racial beliefs that would have the heads of church groups such as Baptists saying they don't understand, they don't want blacks a part of their system. If we don't open up our mind to the woke, nihilistic bull that is put out here, that still diminishes a black person's right to live and survive and be viable in this country while saying you're woke, where you can't speak to your ability to or what you're dealing with in this world, when you can't speak to what you're dealing with on your job, in relationships, going to the store, when you can't talk about the microaggressive things such as just going to Walmart and somebody, as you're going out and seeing many people go out the store, but they only stop your black behind to check your receipt. It is a far, far worse thing to ignore. What is it saying? If you don't stand for something, you fall for exactly. You fall for anything. Are these people who fall for these lies? No, I don't think they're all uneducated. What I believe is that we all hold to certain implicit truths, biases, thoughts, and people stir those ideas with us and they feed us a string of knowledge and we go along with it because it feels comfortable to us. You know, I once told someone that ignorance sounds like intelligence, sounds like words of truth to the foolish. Because they have no way of understanding, is what he's saying or she's saying actually correct? Which is why even on this program, I tell people, when I tell you something historically or whatever, I want to give you a source. I want you to question me and say, hey, where did you get that from? Because I want you to go delve deeper. Conflict is not always a bad thing. Good is supposed to conflict evil. I agree. And that's a great statement. Great statement. Thank you, my son. But I think so often with us as a people, we just get we feel like we have to give up certain things of ourselves A couple of weeks ago, I was talking about the whole Chappelle situation about the LGBTQ plus community, and him saying about punching down. And there were people, family, friends, who did not like what I talked about. But I was really talking about white male patriarchy, and they didn't like that. They didn't like that, right? And we went off for about a week or so after that because a racist really didn't like it. So he lied to YouTube to try to get us removed. But we need to understand who we are. We need to understand what we are. We need to understand how powerful we are and the rights we have as a people. Malcolm X once said, it is not an issue of whether you are a Negro in this country or a Black person in this country. You are a human being. You have rights that are given to you by your Creator. The documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of this country, allude to the idea that you have inalienable rights. You have the right to demand certain things as a human being, the right to live, because no one gave you that but God. And yet we give that up for opinion. We give that up to fit into the crowd. And if our voices rise and say, stop, no, this is not cool, this is not right. There are parts of the male, and I made it very specific, the white male patriarchy, right? That says, no, you will not do that. You will not do that. In the communities, in these cults of communities, and these different cultures that we're claiming to have in this country, there is still so much going on that is not even talked about, that is not even addressed. No one, very rarely do they address the violence going on in the LGBTQ plus community, unless you're in that community. And so how dare a Black, white, or whatever comedian or a person who is not in that community, how dare you speak to that? How dare you take the authority to say that this isn't right? I saw recently that Fox News was saying they were going to have a Patriots Award. Patriots. People who marched on this country and went and beat down at the Capitol doors. Folks who pull guns on other Americans, but they're patriots. Your words have more power than any weapon that they use against you. If you don't believe that, they're quoting Julius Caesar even to this day. They're talking about Constantine to this day. They're talking about the pharaohs of Egypt to this day. Jesus to this day. And yet, they will tell you that the only way to enforce your power is to pick up a weapon. They didn't kill Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. because he picked up a weapon. They killed him because his voice, his ideals were a weapon to them. And it was convincing people, not just here in America. They killed Malcolm X because once a mind opens up to the possibility of unity, of universal understanding of humanity, that has to be quieted. That has to be stifled. I do feel and know that I don't know enough about history to be able to share and convince our people to seek more understanding of what's going on in the forefront, behind the scene, the attacks coming at us sideways. Jid, I agree. We are attacked so much from different sides. Our children are attacked in their education. People are attacked on their jobs. You know, I did a session where I talked about the idea of codes of conduct and major companies that are designed, that are used to be able to marginalize you. Why we have to have certain things like family medical leave and things like that to protect the disabled, the people of color, minorities, age, when our Constitution says that these people are protected anyway. But historically, it is the people on the ground, in the state and the local governments, in the companies, in the buildings, who utilize, it's the HR departments who didn't care about social justice, who didn't mind the fact that Larry comes to work and use the word and says the coloreds, didn't mind the fact that people were being rated lower, not on their ability, but based on the fact that the supervisor found a way to get around that. Our children who go to school every day and are taught a stratified, segmented history, who are told that the words of Shakespeare are more important than the words of a James Weldon Johnson or a James Baldwin, and who don't even find these writers or these people, the Phyllis Wheatleys, they don't even know these names because they're not pushed as important in their daily curriculum. People who will talk about the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, and not talk about the Harlem Renaissance. People who are afraid to talk about race theory, which is not a theory, racial history, because it makes their ancestors look bad. But won't talk to you about your ancestors. Won't talk to you about those who traveled over the seas, those who gave knowledge, those who taught the Greeks, the Romans, the Europeans. They won't talk to you about those things. And so we spend so much time on erudition. And during these sessions, I can only do so much. And sometimes I get into an episode like this on a Thanksgiving or just randomly on the day where I'm going off and I feel like, am I bloviating about our history and losing the folks out here? But it is so important to know, to grow, to acknowledge that history, to not be lost. How many decades did people believe that the Pilgrims came over here and were supportive of Native Americans? How long were the lies perpetuated? But it was told over and over and over and over again because we have been told this to keep us in line. The idea of the discovery, the idea of you can't hate these people who provided this country and this land for you. If you were to believe the Plymouth myth, you think that the Pilgrims came over here and everything just fell in providence to them. But that's not the case. That's not the case. We don't talk about the smallpox and the disease, as I alluded to earlier, that the Pilgrims brought over here. We don't talk about the fact that when the Pilgrims arrived, that there were patches of land that were open, trees had been cut down, things had been done because the indigenous people had fled. We don't talk about the fact that the Pilgrims actually absconded and took over the ship and landed in Plymouth, and they weren't even supposed to go to Plymouth. They chose where they wanted to go and took over the ship. We don't talk about how William Bradford described how the Dutch, how that all of that went down. We don't talk about the historical records because honestly, truthfully, we weren't taught them. And there was purpose to not teaching them. And so as we do more and we say more and we provide more knowledge, I hope that we all get smarter and get better to be able to argue these points, to be able to say unequivocally to people when they bring us false history, that's not right. That's incorrect. Have you read this? Have you read this primary source? Have you read the words of the person that lived through it? I came on here tonight with a whole nother agenda to talk to, but I think that sometimes you have to go as you are led to go. And I didn't expect a whole um, huge audience tonight. I just wanted to be able to come on and talk about our history again tonight. And I don't plan on missing any other Thursdays because I do believe that these sessions are so important. Yes, conflict is not always bad. Sometimes conflict is just needed. But violent conflict without any desire to have any resolution is pointless. There is an article on our webpage. On our webpage, there is a section that is called The Soul of It. And if you go to erudition.com, the eruditionnetwork.com, you will find there is an article in there that's called Our Failed Revolution. It's a very short article. I think it's about a 2-minute read. I wrote it several years ago. And it goes into some of the things that I talked about tonight. Because as we sit here with this holiday of Thanksgiving, because this is Thanksgiving, and we give thanks to God for everything that has been given to us and our families, let's understand the connection and the importance of God. And whether you are religious or not, or let's give it, if you don't want to thank God, if you don't want to give credit to God, just thank the fact that some of your ancestors held out, gave faith and belief to something, to God, as they would say, to be able to hold out. Give thanks at least to that was evident in them, because that's important, because without them, you would not be here and I would not be here. We have to be better. And if you take the time to go to our webpage and you look that up, I want you to read that quick article. It's a very quick blog article that I wrote. And it's on our website. Put that in here. You will be able to read that and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about a little bit more than what I'm going to be able to explain in these next few minutes while we're on. I just want you to be able to understand the significance of having faith. One of my favorite gospel songs, I was talking to my son as we get ready to close this episode. I was talking to my son recently. One of my favorite songs is God's Eyes on a Sparrow. It's been my favorite song since I was a child. And I often, when I was a kid, I would listen to those words and I would think to myself, I was like, if you're out here struggling, fighting, living, trying in a world that seems to knock you on your butt more than it ever lifts you up, and then holding on to that faith, that belief, that God's eyes on the sparrow and he's watching over you. Faith, a lot of times, my family, my culture, my friends out here is all they had. So when I go into Thanksgiving, I often think about that and I give thanks. I give thanks to God for putting the resolve in the minds of those who came before me to not get violent, to not give up, to not descend into tribalism and violent mentalities, to flee and try to get away. And sometimes when conflict did come, to know when to cut that conflict off. Without them, we would not be here. And we owe our existence We owe our progression to them. We are at our hour. I thank everybody who came on briefly. I saw different people coming in and out. I know this is Thanksgiving, but I wanted to do this, and I didn't want to do it early. Tomorrow is my birthday. Yes. Tomorrow is my birthday. I should have said that earlier, and I'm looking forward to it and thanking God for another year on this planet to do what He has put me here to do. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to go enjoy my Thanksgiving meal and celebrate with my family and spend time with my wife and my sons. And I thank you for being on another episode of the Erudition Interactive Black History and Knowledge Session. And we will see you next week, God willing. Have a blessed and wonderful rest of your holiday. And until we see you next week, I hope that God keeps you and that things in your life go well. Thank you very much.